The chains bit into my wrists like iron teeth, yanking me forward through the dim, reeking underbelly of the blood market. Milo's wails pierced the clamor, high, desperate cries that twisted my gut worse than the guard's rough handling. I clutched him tighter to my chest, his tiny body shuddering against me, but the auctioneer's hook-nosed enforcer shoved us both onto the raised block without mercy. The crowd's eyes, pale vampire stares, and the hollow gazes of human debt slaves swarmed us like rats in the torchlit cavern. This was it, the end of everything I'd failed to hold on to. Alara's face flashed in my mind, pale and sweat-slick as she bled out on our village birthing bed. "Luca," she'd gasped, her hand slipping from mine. "Keep him safe." I hadn't. The debts from her illness piled up like stones on my chest. The in-laws' sneers echoing as they dragged us here after her funeral. A scribe's ink-stained hands couldn't pay for midwives or medicines in a world that chewed up the weak. Now Milo, barely 3 months old, squirmed in my arms, his cries raw from the cold stone floors, an endless march. I should have fought harder, begged the lenders sooner, anything but let it come to this, us, sold like livestock to the highest bidder. "Lot 73, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice gravelly over the murmurs. He prodded me with a staff, forcing me to stand straighter on the scarred wooden platform. Widowed human scribe, mid-20s, literate and unbroken, comes with infant male, freshborn, unweaned. Bidding starts at 50 crowns for the pair, but separations available for premium. The words hit like a slap. Separations. I scanned the crowd, heart hammering. Vampires in silk-trimmed cloaks leaned in, fangs glinting under the sputtering lanterns, while a few human buyers, collared servants scouting for their masters, muttered prices. Milo's sobs grew frantic, his little fists battering my shirt as if he knew. My throat closed up, the world narrowing to a panicked haze. I couldn't speak, couldn't even lift my head. All I saw was Alara's eyes dimming, the midwife shaking her head, and me frozen, useless as life drained from her. Not again. Not him. Whispers rippled closer. A merchant in a fur-lined hood nudged his companion. "The babe's a liability, too young for labor, mouth to feed. Take the father for records. Sell the whelp separate to a wet nurse house. Double the coin." Another voice, oily and sharp. "Or to a brood keeper. Vampires pay well for human stock that breeds true." My knees buckled, chains rattling, but the auctioneer yanked me upright. Milo buried his face in my neck, his cries muffled against my skin. The shame burned hot, flooding my face, but worse was the terror coiling in my chest. Cold, paralyzing. I was no warrior, no silver-tongued negotiator, just a man who'd buried his wife and now faced losing his son to strangers who saw us as meat. Bidders circled the block now, a slow, predatory dance. A gaunt vampire with scarred cheeks reached out, tilting my chin to inspect my neck, his breath icy on my skin. "Decent veins. How's your blood taste? Sweet from fear." Laughter erupted, jeering from the shadows. A human buyer, his own wrists scarred from old bonds, circled Milo, peering at him like a merchant weighing fruit. The child's eyes clear. "No sickness, worth 100 alone." I forced the words out, my voice cracking like dry wood. "Please." It came out as a whisper, barely audible over the din. They laughed harder, but I pushed on, the desperation clawing up my throat. Don't separate us. He's all I have. I'll work double, scribe day and night, anything. Just let me keep him." My face flamed, exposed under their stares, the shame of begging before these monsters twisting like a knife. A vampire noblewoman tittered, fanning herself with a lace glove. Listen to the little father plead. How quaint. But I didn't stop, couldn't, even as Milo's cries weakened to whimpers. "He's mine, please, Mercy, keep us together." The auctioneer's gavel hovered, bids climbing in sharp increments, 80, 90 crowns. My vision blurred, the platform tilting under me. This was failure incarnate, me on my knees in chains, voice breaking for a scrap of pity from creatures who fed on despair. Then the air shifted, heavy and electric like a storm front rolling in. The crowd's murmurs died to a hush, bodies parting like water before a blade. I lifted my head, chains clinking, and saw them. 2 figures striding through the throng, cloaks of midnight velvet swirling. The one in front moved with lethal grace, tall and broad-shouldered, his face a mask of carved marble, high cheekbones, eyes like polished obsidian. Whispers hissed, "The king." Aurelian Dracovar, the vampire monarch whose name alone silenced taverns, feared not for wild rages, but for the cold finality of his decrees, the way he crushed rebellions without a flicker of remorse. Beside him, a armored knight, Darek, I guessed from the court gossip I'd overheard in the holding pens, scanned the crowd with a hand on his sword hilt, his face a weathered map of old battles. The auctioneer dropped to one knee, gavel forgotten. "Your Majesty, an honor—" Aurelian ignored him, his gaze cutting straight to the block. To me, those eyes pinned me in place, unblinking, stripping away the haze of panic. I froze, Milo's warmth the only anchor, as the king's presence sucked the air from the cavern. No one moved. Even the bidders bowed low, spines rigid with terror. A woman stepped forward from the noble's edge, elegant, raven-haired, her gown a cascade of crimson silk. Lady Seraphine Valmont, the blood market's favored patron, her smile sharp as a stiletto. "Majesty," she purred, voice smooth as venom, "a tragic lot. Allow me to ease the burden. I'll take the infant, raise him properly in my household, as a gesture of loyalty to the crown, mercy for the child, and the father can serve where needed." Her eyes flicked to me, calculating as if Milo were a pawn to curry favor. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the king's nod. But Aurelian didn't move. He studied me instead, his head tilting slightly, gaze lingering on my chained hands, cradling Milo, then up to my face. Defiant still, despite the tremor in my limbs. Something flickered in those depths, too swift to name before his voice cut the silence like a blade. "No." One word, flat and absolute. He stepped closer, boots echoing on stone, and the auctioneer scrambled back. "The scribe and the child are mine, both as royal property under my seal." Gasps rippled, but no one dared protest. Seraphine's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing, but she dipped into a curtsy, poison veiled in silk. "As you command, Majesty." Darek signaled the guards, and rough hands seized my arms, unchaining me from the block only to bind my wrists anew with finer links. Royal issue, cold silver that burned faintly against my skin. Milo startled at the motion, his cries starting up again, but I pulled him close, murmuring nonsense to soothe him as they hauled us down the steps. Relief crashed through me, first dizzying, Milo still in my arms, not torn away to some gilded cage. We weren't separated, not yet. But as the crowd parted, stares averted from the king's path, terror clawed back in. This wasn't salvation. It was a deeper pit. Aurelian Dracovar, the monster who'd raised border villages for less than defiance, now owned us. His carriage waited at the cavern's mouth, black lacquered, drawn by shadow steeds that pawed the earth impatiently. Darek opened the door, his glance at me, wary, assessing, like I was a threat wrapped in rags. I stumbled forward, guards propelling me inside after the king. The door slammed shut, plunging us into velvet-lined dimness, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and something metallic. Blood, perhaps, or just the weight of power. Aurelian settled across from me, his presence filling the space, unyielding. Milo quieted against my chest, exhausted, but my pulse thundered. What did a king want with a scribe and a babe? A pet? A meal? Or something worse, a tool in his endless games of throne and fang? The carriage lurched into motion, wheels rumbling over cobblestones, carrying us up from the market's depths toward the mountain court, a labyrinth of spires and secrets I'd only heard whispered in fear. I held Milo tighter, my body a shield between him and the shadowed figure opposite. Relief soured to dread. We'd been claimed, yes, but by the devil himself. And in his world, property like us broke easy. The carriage jolted to a halt, iron gates grinding open like teeth in the dark. Guards yanked the door wide, their pale faces masks of indifference under hooded cloaks, and hauled me out by the arms before I could steady Milo against my chest. "Move," one snarled, shoving me toward a towering archway carved with fangs and thorns, the mountain air biting cold against my sweat-damp skin. They marched me through echoing halls, lit by flickering sconces, the stone walls swallowing every footstep. Milo whimpered, his tiny fists clutching my shirt, and I murmured nonsense to him, my voice lost in the vastness. No one offered help. I was cargo, after all, fresh from the auction block. At a side chamber reeking of iron and herbs, they stripped me of everything. The ragged satchel with my wife's locket, the scrap of cloth I'd wrapped around Milo's blanket, a burly vampire with a scarred jaw rifled through it all, tossing the locket aside like trash. "You're Sir Derek's charge now." he grunted, binding my wrists with a silken cord that burned like frostbite. The king claims what he wants. You exist at his pleasure, feed him, warm his bed, amuse the court, displease and you're dust. His eyes flicked to Milo, a flicker of something like pity crossing his face before hardening. The whelp, too. No more auctions for you. But no freedom either. Tools don't walk away. I swallowed bile, the words carving deeper than any blade. Tool. That's all I was now, a means to some royal end, my son's life dangling from the whim of monsters. Darek himself appeared then, broad-shouldered in black leather armor, his gaze appraising me like a horse at market. Clean him up, he ordered the attendants, then turned to me, voice low and unyielding. The king doesn't tolerate weakness. Begging's done. Serve or suffer. He unchained my wrists only to clamp a hand on my shoulder, steering me deeper into the fortress. Milo's weight, my only anchor against the spin of dread. They led me to a chamber tucked in the king's private wing, the door heavy oak reinforced with silver veins. It was small, secure, bars on the narrow window, overlooking jagged peaks. A cradle of polished ebony in the corner, a bed draped in deep crimson. Opulent, yes, but the air hummed with predation. Shadows pooling like spilled blood on the tapestried walls. The attendants dumped a basin of steaming water and fresh linens at my feet, then vanished without a word. I bolted the door behind them, heart hammering, and sank to the floor with Milo in my arms. He fussed, rooting for milk that wasn't there yet. His blue eyes, his mother's eyes, searching mine. I rocked him gently, the room's grandeur pressing in, making us specks in this gilded cage. No more begging, I vowed silently, tracing his downy hair. I'd failed Ilara, let her slip away because I couldn't fight the debts, the fevers, the world's cruelty. But Milo? I'd claw my way through hell before I let them turn him into leverage. Even if it meant playing their game, I'd find a crack in this fortress, a way to shield him without breaking. A knock shattered the quiet, sharp, imperious. "The king summons you," a voice called from beyond the door. No choice. I changed Milo into the soft swaddling they'd left, my hands shaking as I lifted him, and followed the guard to an antechamber bathed in candlelight. Aurelian waited there, not on a throne, but in a high-backed chair by a roaring fire, his form cutting a silhouette of lethal grace. Tall, broad, with hair like raven wings falling to his shoulders, eyes the color of storm clouds fixed on me with dissecting intensity. The air thickened, charged with his presence, every instinct screaming to kneel or flee. "Lucaverin," he said, voice smooth as aged wine laced with venom, gesturing to the stool opposite. No warmth, no preamble. I sat, cradling Milo, who stirred but didn't wake. "You and the child are mine now, a contract sealed at the auction. In exchange for your obedience, your blood when I require it, your presence to display my benevolence, you receive sanctuary, provisions. The boy will not starve or sicken under my roof." His words landed like chains, clinical, binding. Safety for servitude. I nodded, throat tight, but the vow burned in my chest. Obey, but never bow. "And if I refuse?" I asked, voice steadier than I felt. A faint tilt of his head, amusement or annoyance flickering in those eyes. "Refusal ends the bargain. You'd return to the markets or worse, but you won't, not with him." His gaze dropped to Milo, lingering a beat too long, something unreadable cracking his composure. The question burst out before I could stop it. My wound raw and bleeding. "What happens to him if I displease you? If I can't? If I'm not enough?" Milo's safety, always the knife's edge. Ilara's death replaying in my mind, my helplessness the killer. Aurelian stilled, the fire's crackle the only sound. His fingers drummed once on the armrest, a delay that stretched like eternity, his control fracturing just enough to show the man beneath the crown. "The child," he said finally, voice edged with frost, "is under my protection as your extension. Harm to you rebounds on him, but I will not indulge whims that endanger innocence." Uncertainty shadowed his tone, the hesitation about the fragile life in my arms, as if he'd never navigated something so breakable. He leaned forward, eyes locking mine. "Obey the terms, and he thrives. Defy, and we renegotiate." I held his stare, pulse thundering, the power imbalance a chasm between us. He could snap my neck without rising. I could only cling to principle, to the stubborn spark that refused to let Milo become collateral. Understood, I whispered, but inside resolve hardened. I'd play the part, but on my terms where I could steal them. Hours blurred into preparation, servants bathing me in scented oils, dressing me in fine wool tunic and breeches that felt like another's skin. Then the summons to the throne hall, a cavernous space of vaulted ceilings and marble floors veined with obsidian. Vampires in silks and jewels filled the benches, their eyes gleaming with hunger and calculation. Aurelian ascended the dais, motioning me to stand at his side. Milo bundled against me. I did, silent as ordered, the weight of stairs like needles. Lady Seraphine glided forward from the front row, her gown a cascade of midnight lace, golden hair piled high, beautiful, venomous, her smile a blade. "My king," she purred, voice carrying like silk over steel, such a bold gesture, claiming human chattel from the block. But this infant? In the throne hall? Fragile things break so easily amid our deliberations. Surely it's wiser to house them apart, as symbols of your mercy, not risks to the court's sanctity. Murmurs rippled, eyes darting between her and Aurelian. Pressure coiled, her words painting us as disposable ornaments, testing his resolve. My grip tightened on Milo, who squirmed, the hall's chill seeping into his wrappings. Expendable. The word echoed Dareks, twisting my gut. Aurelian's hand rose, silencing the room like a guillotine's fall. His voice boomed, cold authority laced with something fiercer. "The boy is under my house now, Lady Seraphine. Any harm intended him, whispered or wrought, will be answered as treason against my blood. He stands here not as symbol, but as ward. Question that again and face the consequences." Gasps echoed, the court frozen in shock. Seraphine's smile faltered, eyes narrowing, but she bowed with graceful venom. "As you decree, sire." The hall buzzed as she retreated, but Aurelian's gaze flicked to me, a silent command to hold steady. Relief warred with dread in my chest. He'd defended Milo publicly, weaving us deeper into his web. Safety bought with chains, our lives now shields for his image. But in that promise, I glimpsed the fracture. A king who feared his own house, enough to stake it on a human child. And as the assembly dispersed, Milo's warmth against me, the only real thing in this throne of shadows, I wondered what guilt drove him to this, and how long before it consumed us all. The days blurred into a suffocating rhythm, each one starting with the same ironclad summons. I'd wake to the scrape of boots outside my chamber door, Darek's guards, always two of them, their eyes like polished obsidian as they escorted me through the court's endless stone corridors. Milo fussed against my chest, his tiny fists kneading my shirt, and I'd hush him with murmured nonsense while vampires paused in their scheming clusters to stare. I was the king's latest benevolence, they whispered. A human spared the auction block, paraded like a trophy to prove his mercy. But mercy felt like a leash. In the grand hall, I'd stand beside the throne during audiences, holding Milo as nobles petitioned for blood rights or border concessions, their gazes lingering on us with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "See how the king elevates the lowly," one would murmur, but their smiles never reached their eyes. Privately, the panic clawed at me, every shadowed alcove hiding a watcher, every cry from Milo echoing too loudly off the vaulted ceilings. I'd bolt back to our ward the moment the guards allowed, barricading the door with a chair that wouldn't stop a determined predator, my heart hammering as I rocked him through the nights. It was on one of those feeding nights that the routine shattered. The court observed them like holy rites, the king sustaining his rule through controlled indulgence, volunteers from lesser houses lining the shadowed antechamber off the throne room. I'd been told to stay put. Milo had a fever, his whimpers turning to wails that no amount of pacing could soothe. But the herbalist was late, and desperation pushed me out. Milo bundled in my arms as I navigated the labyrinthine halls toward the apothecary wing. The air grew thick with the scent of copper and incense, drawing me toward the wrong door. I pushed it open without thinking, the heavy oak swinging silently on its hinges. Aurelian stood at the chamber's heart, his back to me, a young vampire woman, pale, willing, cradled against him like fragile porcelain. Her throat arched under his mouth, blood tracing slow rivulets down her collarbone, and he drank with the precision of a surgeon, one hand steadying her waist. But his shoulders were rigid, knuckles white where they gripped the edge of a marble table, and a low tremor ran through him, like a wire pulled too taut. The woman's eyes fluttered shut in ecstasy, but his face, God, His face, when he finally sensed me and turned, held no triumph, only a raw, straining effort to contain something feral. His fangs gleamed, slick with red, and for a split second, his gaze locked on Milo in my arms, pupils dilating wide enough to swallow the light. Hunger flashed there, not just for blood, but something deeper, more broken. He released her abruptly, the woman slumping as an attendant rushed forward, and his voice cracked like frost on glass. Out! I backed away, Milo squirming against me, my pulse roaring in my ears. That look, it wasn't the monster of legends devouring without thought. It was a man teetering on the edge, every muscle locked against the fall, and it terrified me more than any rage could, because if he could look that human, that close to unraveling, what did that say about the chains he wrapped around himself? I fled to our ward, bolting the door, and didn't sleep until dawn, crept through the narrow windows. Seraphine struck 2 nights later, her approach as polished as a blade in silk. I'd been summoned to the lesser gardens for what she called an informal gathering, a cluster of mid-tier nobles sipping from crystal goblets, their conversations a web of alliances and slights. Milo dozed in a makeshift cradle at my feet, the air heavy with night-blooming jasmine that did nothing to mask the undercurrent of predation. She glided in like she owned the shadows, her gown a cascade of midnight velvet, and knelt gracefully beside the cradle, her fingers hovering just above Milo's blanket. "Such a delicate burden for a man like you," she purred, her voice honey over venom. "The king means well, but infants, they disrupt. I've arranged a nurse, trained in human care, from my own estates. She could take him to the southern holdings, a safe human enclave far from court intrigues. Fresh air, no fangs at the cradle. Wouldn't that ease your mind?" The nobles leaned in, their eyes sharpening like hawks scenting weakness. My stomach twisted. Separation? Sending Milo away, out of my reach, into her web? No. The word burned up my throat before fear could choke it back. I scooped him up, holding him close enough to feel his heartbeat against mine. "No," I said, loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "He's not going anywhere. Not with your nurse. Not to your estates. He's mine." Gasps rippled through the group, and Seraphine's smile froze, her eyes narrowing to slits. Bold words for a blood pet. The king's benevolence doesn't grant you veto over practicality. Think of the child's welfare. "Welfare?" I snapped, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Your welfare means leverage, lady. Milo stays with me, or you can explain to your king why you're trying to steal his property." The garden fell silent, the nobles exchanging glances like vipers deciding on a strike. Seraphine rose slowly, her composure cracking just enough to show the fury beneath. "You dare!" "I dare!" I cut in, chin lifted, Milo warm and oblivious against me. Punishment would come. I knew it in my bones. But the thought of him alone in some distant cage was worse than any lash. Aurelian materialized from the gloom like a storm cloud, his presence sucking the air from the space. The nobles scattered back, bowing low, but his gaze pinned Seraphine first. "Overstepping again, Lady Valmont." His tone was ice over steel, each word a deliberate slice. "Arranging for my ward's removal without consultation. You forget yourself. The boy remains where I decree, in my private quarters under my protection. Interfere again, and your estates will host nothing but echoes." Seraphine's face drained of color, her lips parting in outrage before she dipped into a curtsy, venom lacing her whisper. "As you command, my king." She swept away, the nobles trailing like scolded pups, leaving the garden echoing with her humiliation. But the victory soured fast. That night, in the dim confines of his study, summoned by a terse note, Aurelian turned that same glacial stare on me. Milo slept in the adjoining nursery guarded by Darrick's men, but I felt exposed, raw. He paced before the fire, his silhouette cutting sharp against the flames. "You defied a high noble in open court, without my sanction." His voice was low, controlled, but the edge promised retribution. "Do you grasp the peril? Seraphine has allies who would see you bled for less. Your recklessness endangers not just you, but the child." I swallowed hard, the reprimand landing like a blow after I'd braced for praise. "I thought I was protecting him. She wants to split us, use him against you." "Against me?" He stopped, looming close enough that I caught the faint scent of aged leather and blood wine on him. "You are not my equal in this court. Luca, you speak for me or not at all." Next time, you hold your tongue, or I'll chain it for you." The words hit like a slap, shaking loose everything I'd bottled since the auction. My vision blurred, chest heaving as the dam broke. Protecting him? That's all I have left. My wife, Alara, she died because I couldn't protect her. Childbirth in that filthy village hut. No healer because we were too poor, too nothing. I froze, Aurelian. I just froze while she bled out, begging me to save her. And now Milo, God, every night I wake sweating, terrified you'll tire of this game, or Seraphine will snatch him away and I'll fail him too. I'm not brave. I'm just terrified of losing the only thing that matters. Silence stretched, thick and accusing. I braced for scorn, for the dismissal that would confirm every fear, that I was weak, disposable. But Aurelian didn't strike. He turned away, staring into the fire, his jaw clenched so tight I heard the faint grind of teeth. When he spoke, his voice was stiff, guarded, like prying open a sealed tomb. My laws, they failed someone once, a human I cared for, centuries ago, a consort and the child she bore me. I lost control, hunger, the curse of it, and she paid the price. The court swept it away to preserve my throne, but the guilt— He trailed off, fists balling at his sides. I cannot vow perfection, Luca. I am what I am. But Milo, his fate will not be bartered by schemers like Seraphine. Not while I draw breath. You have my word on that. The admission hung between us, raw and unexpected, stripping away the myth of the untouchable king. He wasn't just a monster enforcing rigid codes. He was a man haunted, his control slipping like sand through his fingers. I stood there in the dim glow of the chamber's lanterns, Milo fussing softly in my arms, his tiny fists kneading the air as if he could grasp the fragility of it all. Aurelian's eyes met mine for a split second, dark, stormy, pleading for something I couldn't name. Before he turned away, the weight of his confession settling like frost on my skin. Days blurred after that, the court's endless rhythm pulling me deeper into its shadows. I found myself nodding to the servants who brought Milo's warmed milk or fresh linens, their faces less pinched with suspicion now. Old Marta, the one with the scarred hands from some long-ago kitchen fire, even murmured advice on soothing his colic without waking the whole wing. And Darek, God, Derek, the night had started lingering after his patrols. Not with threats, but questions, gruff ones about how Milo fared or if the chambers felt secure enough. The king's not one for half measures, he'd say, polishing his blade by the fire, his gaze flicking to me like he was testing for cracks. I answered carefully, building that wary bridge, because in this place, allies weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. But the whispers followed me like smoke. I caught them in the halls, nobles hissing about the human pet and his whelp softening the throne, how it invited rot into the bloodlines. Seraphine was at the heart of it, her silk gowns whispering alliances in the alcoves, her smile a blade sheathed in courtesy. It came to a head in the council chamber, a vaulted room heavy with the scent of polished oak and old ink. I wasn't there to speak, never that. Aurelian had me stand behind his throne, a silent shadow cradling Milo, who gnawed on a cloth toy to keep quiet. The king's advisors filed in, their boots echoing like judgments, Seraphine at the forefront with her retinue of sycophants. She unfurled a parchment with deliberate grace, her voice smooth as venom-laced wine. "Your Majesty," she began, eyes locking on Aurelian with feigned deference, "the provinces teeter on unrest. Human villages hoard their yields, emboldened by rumors of leniency from the crown. We must reinstate the full levies, double the blood tithes, seize the able-bodied for labor camps. It's the only way to remind them of their place, to stabilize the realm before famine breeds rebellion." The room thickened with murmurs, nods rippling through the lords like a tide. I felt Aurelian's back tense under my gaze, his broad shoulders a wall between me and the vipers. Milo's warmth pressed against my chest, a fragile counterpoint to the cold calculus unfolding. Seraphine didn't glance my way, but her words sliced toward me all the same, painting me as the crack in the king's armor, the softness that would doom us all. "Choose," she was saying without saying it, "the old brutality or this embarrassing indulgence in human frailty." Aurelian leaned forward, his fingers drumming once on the arm of his throne, a sound like distant thunder. "Stricter levies," he echoed, voice low and edged, "would flood the markets with broken stock. We've seen that before. Riots in the streets, loyalty turned to ash. His rejection hung there, firm but measured, rejecting the camps outright while nodding to increased patrols. The council shifted uneasily, Seraphine's lips thinning as she pressed, but he shut it down with a raised hand, dismissing them into the night. I didn't see what came next, not directly, but later as I paced the antechamber with Milo dozing against my shoulder, I overheard the scratch of quill on parchment from his study. Aurelian drafted it alone, a shadowed figure bent over decrees by candlelight. It was a compromise, gray as the mountain fog, edicts that lightened the tithes in secret clauses, funneling aid to the hardest-hit villages under the guise of enforced quotas. It reduced suffering without upending the court's facade of iron rule, a tightrope walk born of his ghosts. My presence behind the throne had haunted him, I could tell, the way his eyes had darted back to Milo during the debate, as if weighing a child's life against centuries of precedent. But he kept it from me, locking the parchment away before I could ask. That night, in his chambers, the fire crackled low as I laid Milo in the crib near the bed. Aurelian entered silently, shedding his cloak, his face a mask of regal distance. The air between us hummed with unspoken things, the earlier vulnerability buried under layers of formality. "The council," I said, turning to face him, my voice steadier than I felt. "Seraphine's proposal, it sounded like it could tear everything apart. What did you decide?" He paused at the decanter, pouring blood wine with deliberate slowness, the liquid dark as his secrets. "Matters of state," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "They don't concern you beyond these walls." It was a brush-off, polite but final, like a door clicking shut. My gut twisted. That old wound reopening, the shame of being a tool, claimed and kept, but never truly seen. Was this all I was? Another consort in a line of doomed humans, used to prop up his throne until I outlived my purpose? Milo stirred in his sleep, and I swallowed the fear rising like bile. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford to beg for, but standing there, watching Aurelian sip his wine with that impenetrable calm, I wondered if the cage was tightening. Seraphine moved fast. Her spies were everywhere, maids with loose tongues, guards with wandering loyalties, and by dawn she knew of the softened edict. She didn't confront it head-on. That wasn't her style. Instead, she twisted the knife outward, engineering chaos to expose the fracture. It started as murmurs in the lower courts, then swelled into a ragged cry at the palace gates. A knot of humans, gaunt and desperate, driven by planted agitators to storm the barriers. They weren't just hungry, they were furious, waving makeshift torches and chanting for fair shares, their voices a raw howl against the night. I heard it from the balcony. Milo bundled against me as the clamor rose like a beast waking. Aurelian was already there, Darek at his side, the knight's hand on his sword. "Staged," Darek growled low, "Seraphine's handiwork, pitting the starved against us to prove her point." The king nodded grimly, his jaw set, but before he could order dispersal, the crowd surged, a flung stone arcing through the iron bars. It whistled past Milo's head, close enough that I felt the air displace, shattering against the balustrade in a spray of shards. Time fractured, Milo's wail pierced the air, my arms clamping him tighter as I stumbled back, heart slamming like a war drum. Aurelian moved like lightning, a blur of shadow and fury vaulting the low wall to the outer steps. His roar cut through the din, not words but primal rage, eyes flashing crimson as he tore into the front line. Fangs bared, he flung rioters aside with brutal efficiency. One man's arm snapped like dry wood, another's throat crushed under his boot. Blood sprayed the stones, the violence a storm of barely leashed savagery. The monster of legends unleashed. I pressed against the cold stone, Milo buried in my chest, his cries muffled against my shirt. Darek barked orders to the guards, containing the flanks, but my eyes locked on Aurelian, on the terror that flashed across his face in that split second before the rage took him, the raw animal fear for the child inches from harm. He wasn't just protecting his property, it was deeper, a father's instinct twisted through immortal veins. But the savagery, God, the savagery, bodies crumpled, the riot shattering under his onslaught, and as the guards hauled the survivors away, Aurelian stood amid the carnage, chest heaving, blood streaking his hands like accusations. Seraphine appeared then, gliding from the shadows of the gatehouse, her gown untouched by the mess. "See, Your Majesty," she called, voice carrying clear over the dying echoes. "This is what leniency breeds, distraction at the heart of power. The human and his burden pull your gaze from the realm's needs. How many more must bleed before you reclaim your edge? Aurelian whirled on her, his form still taut with violence. But he said nothing, just stared her down until she inclined her head and retreated. Derek helped me back inside, his grip firm on my elbow, muttering about securing the wing. But as the doors sealed us in, the adrenaline crashed, leaving me shaken to the core. Aurelian's protection had saved us tonight, his body a shield against the stone and the mob. Yet that same fury, that barely controlled beast, it was the very thing the court whispered would destroy us. Was this salvation, this gilded cage of fangs and secrets, or just another pretty trap waiting to snap shut? Milo quieted against me, his breaths evening out, oblivious to the blood on the stones below. I held him tighter, the question burning in my chest, unanswered in the flickering torchlight. The whispers hit me like shards of ice the morning after the riot, slithering through the stone corridors as I paced the nursery wing with Milo bundled against my chest. His tiny fists clutched my shirt, warm and trusting, but my pulse hammered with every muffled word from the servants beyond the half-open door. "Lady Seraphine's already at the council's ear," one hissed, her voice low and urgent, petitioning to brand the babe a destabilizing force. Says a human whelp in the king's shadow stirs unrest, invites more mobs. And those old laws, the ones from the blood purge era. Any human child too close to the throne gets relocated for the realm's safety. Permanent, they say. No exceptions, not even for royal property. I froze, my breath catching as the words sank in. Relocated. It was a polite veil for vanishing. Human children spirited away to labor camps or worse, their fates sealed to preserve vampire purity. Milo stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and I rocked him instinctively. My arms tightening like a vice. The riot's blood still stained the courtyard stones below, and now this? Seraphine wasn't just circling, she was striking, using the chaos we'd barely survived to pry us from Aurelian's grasp. Betrayal burned in my gut, not just from her, but from the king himself. How many secrets had he buried, decisions made in shadowed chambers that painted targets on backs like mine? We'd been symbols to him, Milo and I, a human bargain to flaunt his mercy, a shield against the court's unrest. But if it endangered my son, I couldn't wait. Clutching Milo closer, I stormed from the nursery, my boots echoing off the vaulted halls as I made for Aurelian's private chambers. Guards nodded me through. Darek's orders, no doubt, after last night, but my hands shook with the weight of what I carried. The heavy oak door to his hall loomed, flanked by iron sconces flickering like dying stars. I shoved it open without knocking, the hinges groaning in protest. Aurelian stood at the far end, silhouetted against a tall window overlooking the jagged peaks, his broad shoulders rigid under a black velvet doublet. He turned slowly, those storm-gray eyes locking onto me, surprise flickering before it hardened into wariness. "Luca! What?" "You knew," I cut in, my voice raw, stepping forward until Milo was a barrier between us, his warmth the only anchor keeping me from crumbling. Or you should have. Seraphine's dragging ancient laws into the light, ones that would rip Milo from here, from me, because he's destabilizing a baby, and you let it fester, using us as your pretty human tokens while the court plots to erase us for good. His jaw tightened, the lines of his face sharpening in the dim light, but he didn't interrupt. I pressed on, terror twisting into fury. "We've been your symbols, Aurelian, proof of your enlightened rule, but symbols get discarded when they outlive their use. If staying here paints a death mark on my son, then take it back. Release us. Let me walk out these gates with him alive, even if it's to scrape by in some forgotten village. Just keep him breathing." The words hung heavy, my chest heaving as I met his gaze, defiance warring with the fear that choked me. I'd frozen in the face of threats before, timid, always calculating the safer path, but not this, not Milo. Aurelian's eyes darkened, something fracturing behind them, and he crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching us. The air between us crackled, his presence a wall of restrained power that made my skin prickle. "I am not using you," he said low and edged with gravel, but his voice cracked on the last word. He raked a hand through his dark hair, the gesture so human it stunned me. "Not like that. Gods, Luca, if you knew—" He paused, breath ragged, then exhaled sharply. 2 centuries ago, I had a consort, human, like you, Alara, and a son, barely older than Milo when it happened. I thought I could control it, the hunger, the court. But one night, after a betrayal in the ranks, I lost myself. Fed too deep, too wild. She died in my arms, and the court deemed him a risk, a reminder of my weakness. They took him, relocated him under those same laws Seraphine invokes now. I let them to save my throne, to prove I was unbreakable. His confession landed like a blow, his eyes haunted, stripped bare in a way I'd never seen. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. I've kept you at arm's length for the same reason. Fear of repeating it, of the hunger winning again, or the court twisting you into another tragedy I can't undo. But pushing you away? It's the pattern that's breaking me now. I stared, Milo's soft breaths the only sound in the charged silence. The king's vulnerability hit harder than any threat. This ancient ruler, feared and ironclad, admitting he'd been as lost as I was. My anger ebbed, replaced by a reluctant ache. Then why claim us at all? I murmured, my free hand clenching at my side. Before he could answer, the doors burst open again. Seraphine swept in, her crimson gown trailing like spilled blood, a sealed parchment clutched in her pale hand. Darek flanked her, his face a mask of tension, but she ignored him, eyes gleaming with triumph as she thrust the edict toward Aurelian. The ancient council has spoken, Your Majesty. The child destabilizes the realm. Too close to the throne, too human. He must be removed at once for safety's sake. And if an unfortunate accident were to befall him en route, well, precedents allow for such conveniences. Her smile was a blade, hinting at the poison she'd gladly pour. Aurelian's body went still, a predator coiling, but he didn't strike. Instead, he snatched the parchment, scanning it with a sneer before crumpling it in his fist. No, he said, voice booming as he strode past us toward the antechamber doors, flinging them wide to reveal the assembled court beyond. Nobles murmuring in the grand hall, drawn by the commotion. Seraphine faltered. Sire, the law is a chain I forged myself, Aurelian roared, mounting the dais in a blur of motion. The court fell silent, faces paling as he drew a silver dagger from his belt, slicing his palm without flinching. Blood welled, dark and glistening, and he raised his hand high. I renounce the precedents that devalue human lives as mere chattel. From this night, any harm to Luke of Erin or his son Milo carries the penalty of treason against the crown. I swear it by my blood. Binding, unbreakable. Let the realm witness. They are under my protection, as equals in my house. Gasps rippled through the hall. Seraphine's composure cracking into fury as nobles shifted, alliances fracturing in whispers. Darek moved to Aurelian's side, hand on his sword, eyes scanning for dissenters. Unrest will follow, he muttered low, just for the king. I'll double the watches. Aurelian nodded curtly, but his gaze found mine across the room. Steady and unyielding, the weight of it pulled me forward. Milo secure in my arms as the court dissolved into murmurs. He'd weakened his throne for us, defied centuries of tradition, inviting knives in the dark, and in that moment, staring at the blood dripping from his hand, I felt the knot in my chest loosen just a fraction. I couldn't shield Milo alone, not in this viper's nest. But trusting him, trusting this circle of Darek's grim loyalty and Aurelian's raw confession might be the only way to keep us whole. The days blurred into a tense quiet. After that, the court's undercurrents churning like a storm held at bay. I didn't retreat to the nursery. Instead, I cornered Aurelian in his study one evening, Milo dozing in a cradle nearby as candlelight danced over maps of the realm. No more shadows, I said firmly, meeting his eyes over the desk. If policies touch humans, auctions, laws, any of it, I need to know. Not as your property, but as someone who sees the cost. He leaned back, surprise softening his features, then nodded. Agreed. Consult me as you will. It wasn't surrender, but a bridge, fragile, tested by every sidelong glance, from nobles who now whispered of the king's human folly. We started small, poring over edicts by firelight, my scribe's eye picking flaws in the old blood laws, while Aurelian weighed the political fallout. Reform the auctions first, I suggested one night, tracing a line on the parchment. Make them contracts, not sales. Give humans a voice, or at least a choice. He argued, voice sharp with caution. It risks rebellion, but listened, conceding points until we sketched a draft together, his hand brushing mine in the lamplight, sending a reluctant warmth